Hi, Jerry. I'm Thomas Chu from
Hi, Thomas.
Australia.
Nice to meet you again.
Likewise. Yeah, it's the second time for us to meet. Right?
Second time, yeah.
So it is great to meet you again because I know that a few days ago you've been having a very prestigious appointment. You were the keynote speaker for a very prestigious ceremony.
Yeah, actually I wasn't the speaker. I had been nominated and now I am a member of the Zhongshan Association for Friendship with Foreign Countries.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like an ambassadorial role for Zhongshan. I represent Zhongshan quite often in things like Zhongshan newspapers, Zhongshan videos.
I see.
We've had documentaries made about my wife and I because we've done some charity work in Zhongshan.
Right.
And it's all kind of a culmination of recognition for my contribution, which I think is quite small, but they seem to think is greater than it really is to the city which I've made home.
Yeah, Jerry, you are too humble because people have been watching you living in Zhongshan for just over 2 decades.
Correct.
You've been doing great work for what you have seen, and you mentioned to people in your video to say this is the true China. I've been living here for a while, and that's the reason why when I know that you've been appointed as an overseas member of Zhongshan, it is great because it helped the community know more about overseas as well as about Zhongshan. And I, being ethnic Australian Chinese, I see myself as the bridge, BRIDGE, right? Linking up China with my second homeland, Australia. And likewise, I know that you are also Australians, and you and I share this similar sort of mission, hoping that one day we can rebuild the bridge now being burned down.
Yeah,
right.
I call it rebuilding the bridge. It's not building a bridge. The bridge has already been there, and it's being deliberately dismantled by disinformation. And a lot of people in Australia seriously believe that China is some kind of threat to them, economic threat, physical threat, a kinetic war threat. China is no threat to anybody in that respect at all. Economically, China is Australia's best friend, ought to be China's best friend, and politically there is no real difference between China and Australia in how the government wants to help the people. The Chinese government are no different to any other government that is benign, effectively. So I see this as rebuilding rather than bridge building. And I go back to the days, we can go back a couple of 100 years, 150 years to the time when there was kind of an exclusion act. Chinese people weren't welcome in Australia at that time. Well, that's history. Then we got the Whitlam era where China and Australia opened up. They actually did that before the Americans did. So when Kissinger was getting all of this praise, Whitlam had already been here. Whitlam had already done that. So we're living in an era now where we tend to forget this kind of political history. Gough Whitlam opened China before the United States did. Gough Whitlam came to China before Kissinger and Nixon did. And we had this great era and many years of very good cooperation between China and Australia. Then we had the free trade agreement in 2015. And then around about 2017, it all started to turn bad again and people started dismantling this.
It's a pity.
It is a great pity.
I can't agree more because I have been a member of the Australia-China Council, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade of the Australian government from 1998 to 2004. There was the sort of a wonderful period, and further on, I helped Australia and China to sort of building a better relationship in terms of, at the same time, I provide legal advice to the Chinese nationals studying in Australia. So we have the wonderful time in a year, I think 2014 to 2016, something like that. Unfortunately, the Australia-China Council, acronym ACC, being decommissioned by the former Scott Morrison government, is really a pity because Australia-China Council being built, established by the Whitlam government with Zhou Enlai in the old day, with a very long history, serving the understanding of the people between Australia and China. So I still think that we have to rebuild the bridge is a mission for us to accomplished because we need to do it, and that's why I'm here and you are here to give your opinion on how you see yourself in China, living here for just over 2 decades. So I think my fans in my video, in my group, would like to hear from you. Likewise, your fans, FANS, would like to know how Jerry been thinking about the present-day China.
Okay, I came to China in 2004. It's almost exactly 20 years ago. Just last month had an anniversary of that date. And when I arrived here, I knew within literally minutes that I had been misled. I thought it was misunderstanding. I didn't realize how much or how deep the misinformation went at that time. And I just figured, well, people who don't live in China don't really understand it and they've got it wrong. It's not a backward country. It's not, it was quite dirty. It was quite corrupt. There was a lot of things that were right about the information, but they didn't affect people like me on the ordinary level.
Right.
So it was quite a nice place to live. I'd be honest, I didn't enjoy my first few months here. I felt isolated, not speaking the language, not knowing friends, being away from home. There's a culture shock, a very big culture shock. You think you know Chinese food, and then you go to a Chinese restaurant and they have no idea what you're talking about. So that was kind of difficult for me, and it made my first few months here quite hard. But after a few months, I started to say, well, hang on, I want to stay here a little longer. I want to travel a little more. I'd been to Xi'an, I'd been to the Three Gorges, and that was my first year of traveling here. When I had a holiday, I took a break and went somewhere. And I realized that I wasn't ready to go home. It was only about 10 years later that I realized that this actually is home now, and I am not leaving. I'm staying in China. But
well, may I interrupt?
Yeah.
Why you make that sort of decision you want to stay on after 10 years?
I'm not sure it was exactly 10 years, and I'm not sure what caused the decision, but we got to a point. I'm married in China to a local Chinese lady, and we have a home here. We have many friends here. And, you know, the idea of moving, let's say if I moved back to Australia or moved back to the UK, I lived in the UK until I was 28. If I were to move back to either of those places, I have very few connections there. I have a daughter in Australia, and I have some brothers in the UK, but my father is still alive. He's still in the UK, but he's 94 years old, and, you know, he's not going to be there forever, and I'm not that close to my brothers, and we live scattered all over the country, so it's not like I would be with my friends. I'd have to start a new life. And at this age, I don't see a reason why I would want to start something new. I'm very happy with what I have here in China. I can't describe this as wealthy or anything like that. We have a good lifestyle. We have a very good life. We live with all not cons. Everything that you think you might miss about another country is available to you here. And so I just got the decision. I mean, it wasn't even a conscious decision. It was just a process where one day it was decided that we weren't going home. For my wife, this is home, so that's part of that reason too.
I come to know you because of your first video with Robbie Barwick. About Xinjiang. I think talking about 3 or 4 years ago, right?
The first video, it was about 4 years ago. I didn't get active on social media until 2020. I had a Twitter account, and I didn't use it for 5 years. And then when I was bored, I was basically I retired, and I thought I'll get active online. And then the pandemic came, and we were kind of restricted from doing our normal things. So I had more free time. I wasn't working. I was retired. And what shall I do? So I know what I'll do. I'd recently finished a bike ride where I'd ridden, my wife and I had ridden from Urumqi in Xinjiang all the way to Zhongshan. And I thought I'll post some pictures. And I got very political comments about that. Many people saying, but you can't go to Xinjiang. Well, yes, you can. There's some, but you'll be monitored by the police. Well, no, you're not. And, you know, all of a sudden I realized I have some information here that others have as misinformation. And that's what started it. I was interviewed by a Western media group. I won't mention the name of the magazine, but it was quite a nasty... The interview was fine, very nice, very pleasant young lady who interviewed me, and then wrote a scathing article about how I was duped by I was a Beijing influencer. At the time, I had 4,000 followers, so that's not much of an influencer by anyone's standard. I wasn't on YouTube. I wasn't making videos. I was just writing articles and Twitter posts. So I wasn't much of an influencer, but she called me a Beijing influencer. She said that I was looking at everything with rose-tinted glasses. I was ignoring the oppression. And I'm saying, well, there was no oppression.
Sorry, Jerry. How would that journalist or reporter wrote that? Did she imagine or something?
She actually, here's the interesting thing. She interviewed me live.
Yes.
That interview is now on YouTube because I kept a copy of it. The entire interview. And she selectively took some quotes. For example, she asked me, would you live in Xinjiang? And I said, no, I wouldn't. And then I went on the reasons why I live in Zhongshan. My wife is here, my job, everything else. I was teaching part-time at the time. Everything I was doing was in Zhongshan. And I said, and also I don't like the weather up there. It's pretty harsh. It's bitterly cold in winter. It's incredibly hot in summer. So there's a lot of reasons why I wouldn't live there, but you know, I'm quite happy where I am. And it got to, when asked, Jerry said no, he would not live in Xinjiang. Too much oppression or something like that. Well, I didn't say that at all, but the entire interview is available online now.
I see.
That was probably the first time that I realized that this isn't misinterpretation or misunderstanding. This is deliberate mis or disinformation.
So we edited interview.
Well, she never showed the interview. She interviewed me on Skype, and we recorded the interview, and I kept a copy. And after the interview, she linked me to the article. And I said, well, hang on a second. You have misrepresented me in many different ways here. So I wrote, because I wasn't making videos at the time, I wrote a script and I posted the article. And then so I posted the video and then linked the script to it, my own written article, where she had put this wrong. And that was really my first exercise in correcting misinformation, and it snowballed from there. Robbie got in touch with me right out of the blue, the Citizens Party in Australia. Robbie contacted me right out of the blue from Twitter and said, look, you know, you've got some information about Xinjiang and I'd like to talk to you about it. So I said, sure. I, at the time, honestly didn't know who Robbie was. I know now, he's a good friend now. And I have enormous respect for the work that he's doing with the Citizens Party. If I was in Australia, I would be voting for them.
I see.
So, Robbie interviewed me and we talked a little bit about the bike riding, but then more about the political situation.
So thanks for that, because that background hasn't been sort of known to the outside world. And we will sort of mention it when, after this interview, we will post it in English, and also MM and I will do another one in Chinese, elaborating what you and I have been discussing. We will be very faithful and loyal to what we've been discussing.
That's okay, I trust you.
Thank you so much.
I actually trusted the lady who did this. I thought that she would do the right thing because I said these things, and she misquoted and she misconstrued some of the things. I would say it was totally deliberate.
But why we do this interview simply because we want to do a very proper and correct information platform. We call it multimedia platform. And the acronym for our platform is ECHO, E-C-H-O, Ethnic Communities Homeland Opportunities. So the platform is open to the whole world, all the ethnic or so-called minority groups living in different countries. We try to do fair and justice for everybody in this international, or what we call the global village. So that's the way that we want to do in future, or in the near future. So for that reason, we have this interview today. By the way, about a month or two, you did a series of videos about the democracy in China, and I believe that will be very sort of inspiring compared with what happened a few days ago in America. So would you mind to sort of elaborate a little bit on the video you did about the China style of democracy to our supporters?
Sure. Personally, I don't like the use of the word democracy to describe what China has. Now, I'm not in conflict, but I contradict the Chinese government, who like to call it whole process people's democracy. And that's their word. I personally think the word democracy has been changed in our understanding to mean something entirely different. Now, what I think is China has what I call a collaborative governance system.
I can't agree more.
It talks to the people, it listens to the people, it reacts from the people. It's a dictatorship of the proletariat. China, in its constitution, is a people-driven constitution. It does things that the rest of the world don't do. It listens to its people. Now, and I say the rest of the world, I'm talking about, I grew up in the UK, I lived in Australia, and I've studied the American system quite deeply in recent times. And the American system has been taken to a few other places as well. And what I've seen in China is an entirely different system. Whole process people's democracy, as they call it, or collaborative governance, as I call it, is a system whereby every single community, everywhere in China, there's an office. It can't be missed. It's a red and white building. And in that building, the NPC has a representative who comes there at scheduled times to listen to the people. The NPC is the National People's Congress. And the National People's Congress actually vote on who they want and what laws they want. Now, people say, of course, it's a rubber stamp parliament. It does rubber stamp. Exactly what goes through the parliamentary system gets stamped off, gets approved. But before it gets into the parliamentary system, there is a massive amount of negotiation, a massive amount of dialogue between the people, between the governments, between the departments. Every single person who is a stakeholder in understanding what needs to change has a chance to put their part into that. So if a person, for example, living in a village has a problem with parking, the National People's Congress will deal with it. The National People's Congress will deal with the parking problem in a local village. Now, that beggars belief to someone in the West, because that's a local council issue. And it goes all the way through. So people come up with ideas, and they say to their NPC delegate or representative, they say, I've got this idea, and I think we should do this. And that idea can become law locally, before it becomes law provincially, and then it could become law nationally, just because somebody had an idea. You know, we think that this is a good idea, and then they take it to the community office and say, yeah, that's a good idea. And they put the information into an app. That app gets moved around and people can talk about it. People can add to it. People can change from it. And this whole thing might take a year. It might take 2 years. But eventually, it'll either be discarded as not being useful because not enough people wanted it. That's the process of democracy. Or it will be enacted as law by the NPC in the 2 sessions where they call it the rubber stamp parliament. After many months of negotiation, very, very in-depth, things get moved, things get changed. And that is how China has consistently improved. It's a people-driven progress. It's the procession of a very small idea. And a great example, one lady that I met doing this TV series that I did, was a lady who had a son. And her son couldn't go to the local school because this lady came from Gansu, so the son had to go back to Gansu to go to school, or pay a very large amount of money for local schooling. So she worked a system out with the school. How do I get this changed? She volunteered in the community, she helped through the school, she did a lot of different things in the community, and she wrote a little booklet to help other people do it. Someone came along and said to her, this is a great idea. Can we bring this into the Provincial People's Congress? Would you like to stand for election for the People's Congress? And she said, well, yeah, if you want me, I will. She stood for election. She was elected to the People's Congress. 5 years later, she was elected to the National People's Congress. And now the workers of migrant children have the right to go to school wherever their parents are, as long as they fulfill certain criteria that this lady instigated, put in place, and then enacted as a law. So that started in Zhongshan.
Oh, that's great, Jerry. What you've been talking about and letting our fans know is this is a true democracy. People's voice can, despite it's very tiny, eventually if there's a big issue that the whole community is concerned about, it could be law nationally. And that's how when the Chinese people say our interpretation of democracy, in fact, if you break it down into two literary English, is people and master. And the Chinese system is really treating people as the master of the nation. And on the other hand, if I can make democracy as a gag, as a joke, right? So when you say democracy and you break it down, it's a democracy. So the democracy now is happening in America.
Yes.
But when I say America, I just find it, it was once a great, glorious nation, have everything. So before this video being prepared, we discussed a little bit about the glorious time after the war.
Yeah.
So maybe you can repeat that one?
Yeah, it was, actually this came out this morning in a conversation I was having with someone else too.
Right.
We were talking about China and how China progresses, and my friend asked me, do you think China will stop this forward planning when they've reached the ultimate goals? Well, the answer to that is no, they won't, because there is no ultimate goal. The goal is constant improvement, so that's what they're doing. Now, if we go back in time, about 65, 70 years, what we'll find is in America, they had exactly the same system. They built an incredible infrastructure of highways, railway lines, water. Everything was done. That was 70 years ago. They're still using the same roads, bridges, train lines, hospitals, colleges, schools. They're still using the same infrastructure from 70 years ago and not adding much to it. Pretty much the only thing that's improving in America is strip malls. You can go shopping in a Walmart and you can buy everything, or you can go shopping in a hardware store and you can buy everything that you need. But now there's no butcher, there's no baker, and there's no candlestick maker left in the high streets. So there's a negative side to that too. So progress changes many, many things. But in China, it seems like progress moves forward and it brings everything with it instead of leaving everything behind. And I think that's what China is doing with its constant 5-year plans.
Yes.
It's always thinking 5, 10, 15, and even 30 years ahead. Where are we going to be in 30 years' time? And what America has done is it's stopped doing that. It's impossible to forward think beyond the next election cycle.
Right.
And as we've just seen in a great democracy, as we've just seen, the last 6 months in America, there's been very little in the way of governance.
Yes.
They're too busy politicking to try and get reelected. So for the first year of the new administration, people are learning their new jobs. For the last year of the new administration, they're working to keep their jobs. And you may only get a couple of years of, and in Australia it's even worse because it's only 3 years.
Yes, I was a little bit surprised when New York Times published on the 6th of November an author, I believe his name is Tyler Austin Harper. He criticized the present presidential result, saying that it's not for the benefit of the people, just for two parties fighting each other. They are not really doing something for the good of the American people. So compared with what we have seen in China, is every 5 year move forward, no end. They just want to modify and perfect it and make sure that every citizens in China all excelled with good living and so on and so forth. And I believe that might be one of the reasons you prefer to live in China, if I may say so.
Yeah, I've certainly seen, huge, and I mean really huge changes in China. The obvious thing is the infrastructure. We have a bridge to Hong Kong, we have a bridge to Shenzhen, we have a metro system which is just about to open going into Guangzhou. I can catch a train from here to Beijing, from 15 minutes down the road is a train station, and I can go direct to Beijing. It'll take me 8 or 9 hours. If I try and fly to Beijing, it'll take me 8 or 9 hours. So it's cheaper, it's faster, it's more convenient. I can get on the train, sit down, order a cup of coffee. I can actually order, if I wanted to, I can order a McDonald's to be delivered to the train at the next station.
True.
Things like this are just mind-blowing. So the infrastructure changes and the little things that go along with the infrastructure changes. I often say that the backbone of China's development is the express delivery. You cannot have this kind of development without express delivery. And we joke about, I can be on a train and say, I feel like a Starbucks. What's the next stop? Well, the next stop is Changsha. I'll just order a Starbucks and have it delivered to seat number, and the Starbucks will deliver it to the train station. The train attendant will pick it up and deliver it to my seat.
Yes.
That's a joke. It's true. It happens, and we joke about that. But there are thousands and thousands, probably hundreds of thousands, of small businesses operating on express deliveries. They're fruit businesses, they're clothing businesses, they're electronics businesses. I was in a hotel a little while ago, and I realized I'd forgotten my mouse, and my pad on my computer doesn't work. So I need the mouse to operate it. I said, oh my God, I've forgotten the mouse. And my wife said to me, well, I'll just get another one. 15 minutes later, a robot rang the doorbell of my hotel room and delivered a new mouse to me.
Yeah.
As simple as that. What happened was my wife had gone online to the local Xiaomi store. They had handed it to an express rider. The express rider delivered it to the hotel put it in the robot brought it up to the 15th floor, and I had my mouse 15 or 20 minutes after ordering it. Now that is progress. And that is convenience, and that is what's happening in China. We don't need to go shopping. Everything can be delivered to the door.
Yeah,
in fact, everything is.
Exactly. So very thankful to you to telling our friends out there, maybe any corner of the world, they may not necessarily know that China has been so advanced, developed in terms of that. So how would you see the current Chinese economy? In particular, say for example, Zhongshan. So people or some of the sort of outside media saying that China's economy is collapsing.
Yeah.
So we just all laugh. How could it be? So would you mind to elaborate on that point, whether or not you have seen any sort of stagnance or even collapsing scenario happening?
Okay, no. The answer to that is a straightforward no. There are challenges in the Chinese economy. We all know that. Many people talk about the collapse of the property development industry. I see that differently. Yes, it has taken longer to fix than was anticipated, but it is a definite change in what was going wrong with the property development economy. What was happening before was prices were escalating. They were going sky high. Salaries in China have increased on average over the last 10 years by 8% a year. House pricing was going up by 30, 40, and 50%. In some cities, it was even higher. Now, you cannot look at a house. In China, they sell houses by the square meter. And in some of these cities, 1 square meter was in the region of 100,000 RMB. Now, these people who are working and getting decent salaries are earning maybe 25,000 RMB. So they're having to work 3 months just to buy 1 square meter of their property. You put that into an 80 or 90 square meter apartment, and you're talking about a lifetime of debt to buy a property. And that was because speculators were buying the property off the plan. The government said this has got to stop. In 2019, they said that's going to stop. In 2021, they stopped it, and there was 2 or 3 companies that didn't do what the government said they were going to do, and that caused a property problem. Had they not done it, they happened to be very big, and they probably thought, well, the government won't let us collapse because we're too big. So what then happened was the government said, we need to change this so that it doesn't affect ordinary people. Speculators can't make all this money. Most of the speculators who made money were actually in America or overseas because these 2 or 3 companies were listed on the New York Stock Exchange or Hong Kong Stock Exchange. So they were making money overseas by ripping off Chinese customers. What happened was the prices did collapse. They went down by a large amount. Local governments did have some difficulty because they had debts related to the price, the value of their properties. These were problems. They are now at a situation where prices will continue to rise again, but only by 4 or 5% a year. That's what the government wanted. Because our income is rising by 5, 8, or 10% a year. They don't want property prices rising so much. So speculation in the property industry stopped. House prices corrected, and it was a tough time.
Yeah, what you are saying is the Chinese government very strategically make it a soft landing.
Well, it turned out to be a harder landing than they wanted. There is no doubt about it. The property, I call it a controlled demolition, but the correction in the property industry has taken longer to resolve, and it is more difficult and it is deeper than they wanted it to be. But they did actually create it themselves. The government knew what was going to happen. I think it just didn't expect that 2 or 3 companies, very large companies, would defy them as they did. Now, the CEOs of those companies are facing criminal actions now because they did what they did. So that's one aspect. There is a youth unemployment problem. It's a little higher than it needs to be, but it spikes in June, and the rest of the world sees July's headlines saying, youth unemployment in China is incredibly high. It's 20%. Well, yes, it is in June because graduates come out of university looking for jobs. And by September, it's back down to 9 or 10 or 12%, which is comparable with the rest of the developed world. So it's not that big a problem. Just a few days ago, 2 or 3 days ago, there was a conference in the Greater Bay Area where I live, in Guangzhou. In this conference, what they found, or what they announced, was that they have direct foreign investment just this year of more than, I can't remember the number, but it was hundreds of billions of dollars. And I think the top 100 companies that are foreign companies investing in China have all invested more than 100 million in the last few years. 100 million US dollars invested in China by 100 companies. And that shows you that CEOs don't think China is collapsing. They know where the money needs to go in order to make more money. And China is the market for them.
Yeah, I can't agree more. That's the reason why I think people would like to hear how experts living in China been seeing the Chinese economy. And thanks, Jerry, for that. The next question, or we try to just make this interview concluded with a little bit of your observation on Taiwan issues. Well, we know that when Robbie Barwick and his colleague have been talking about the resolution 2758, in fact, already a dead horse, right? So that's why Richard Barton's talking about what had happened. It's not China twisting the interpretation of 2758. It's in fact the Western world twisting it, because the issue already been done and concluded, and full open sort of a selection voting being voted down. So in other words, it is the Western world twist the 2758 resolution rather than China.
It's not even the entire Western world that's doing this. It's being led by Americans, and it's 1 or 2 people in Taiwan. And of course, they're trying to get, and they never will get, the support in the United Nations. I don't think America realizes, because they're so misinformed, and I believe even at a higher level, their senior government officials are misinformed. They don't seem to understand that China is not as isolated as they think it is. China just recently had a 53 African countries' leaders come to China. For there's only 54 African countries. Eswatini probably didn't get invited because it's the only country that recognizes Taiwan. But 53 other countries which recognized China were in China, talking to China about future development. So those 53 countries are not going to vote to change resolutions against China. As Eswatini, which used to be called Swaziland, probably will, because they still recognize Taiwan. But you've got Lithuania changing its mind at the moment and finding it's very difficult to continue being Lithuania without China's support. And that is what happens. These countries realize that they followed the wrong path. So Taiwan is never, let's get this on the table, Taiwan is never going to be an independent country. Never. China will not allow that. But that doesn't mean that China is going to invade Taiwan, because China does not want a continuation of a civil war, which is why Taiwan has a degree of separation from the rest of China. It's just a continuation of the civil war. It's an unresolved matter relating to the civil war. Now, what this new idea about Taiwan, and it is a new idea.
Yeah.
It's taken 50 years for someone to think, oh, we can change this, we can do this. What this means is that America cannot be trusted. Simple as that. 3 different presidents have declared, convincingly declared, that they will stop supporting Taiwan as there is only one China. And Beijing is the capital of it.
Right.
So 3 different presidents have signed off on this. Now, it doesn't really matter how you interpret what they did or what they said. 3 different presidents have signed off on this. And those 3 presidents have gone back and told their Congress and their Senate, and the Congress and the Senate have said, we don't like that. We want to do something different. So let's have a Taiwan Relations Act and create something that causes problems for the CCP, as they continue to call the Communist Party of China. So they've done something there that they've deliberately created an issue for China to deal with.
Yeah.
Now, it's quite deliberate, and it is misinformation, it is disinformation. 3 different presidents accepted that China is one country and Beijing is the capital of it. Interpret that how you like, but it cannot be interpreted as any other thing than we cannot trust the Americans, because the Americans are now saying, oh, we need to interpret that differently. Yeah. So that's what I would say. If an American president promises something, wait until he's got congressional approval, the United States Supreme Court hasn't overridden him, and it actually is enacted as a law when they do so. Otherwise, they can't be trusted. It's as simple as that.
When my team did the research, we found all those information in the archive of the U.S. State Historic Library and sort of a State Department's archive and historic record. In other words, they can't deny what they have done.
Oh, they can't deny it. I mean, the receipts are there.
Yeah, everything there, and the records being there. And also, not to mention a very clear record being sort of shelved, libraries, and more or less sorting out data rooms in the United Nations, in particular the annual report of UN during the period. So everything being done. So what they are now doing, as I can see, is beating on a dead horse. It will never work. But on the other hand, we really would like people in the outside world to realize that Taiwan is in fact domestic issues and affairs of China.
Yeah.
So if we try to agitate, we build a new concept, which again, what they really want to do is rewrite history. I don't think it is right, and I don't think people would agree to that. And not to mention there are 1.4 billion people in China. They will say no.
So if you want democracy, and the Americans claim they do, then let's vote. Let's have a vote to see whether Taiwan comes back. The people of Taiwan, generally speaking, will say no. I think there's 24 million people there. There might be a few million say yes, and a few million say no, and a few million say we want to keep it as it is, the status quo. So that's one issue. The second issue is if you're going to say to a part of China, and it is a part of China, that some part of it is entitled to some degree of independence or total independence, well, let's have a vote on it.
Yeah.
Okay? 1.4 billion people are going to say, no, it's not. At least the 1.4 billion people who are allowed to vote, which will be a large number because almost everybody in China is of voting age because there's not so many younger people. So the people who really want this are very, very small number, very small. And it just a simple case. And if the United States says something and promises you something, then you have to wait until that is written into American law for it to happen. The United States president agreed with the Cairo Declaration and many other things. It just goes back a long, long way. This is not an issue right now.
Yes, so let's conclude on the current U.S. presidential result.
Right.
So as we can see now, Donald Trump having every power. This is more or less, people describe him as the tyrant under democracy. So more or less the decay, the U.S. style of claiming democracy is now dead. So what do you think?
Well, I just made a video called Democracy is Dead, but I've got a little more to add to that. That video is there and I'm on record as saying U.S. does not have democracy. But there's a little more to add to that because I put that out before the election when we didn't know who was going to win. And the interesting thing about this, 4 years ago, Donald Trump lost the election with 73 million votes. This time he won the election with 71 million votes. Now that tells me something about American democracy. Now, every single person in America has heard this story. Get out and vote because your democracy is at stake. This is the most important vote of your life. It was the last time, it was the time before, it probably was the time before that. They're always going to get told this. But 71 million people voted for Donald Trump this time, 73 million people voted for him last time, and he lost the election. So less people are bothering to vote. There are 320 million Americans, 71 million voted for him. So that has given you a minority leader, not a majority leader. Now, unfortunately, you can't count the people who abstain. That's the problem with democracy. Because when people say, I'm not going to bother voting, then you get a whole range of people who say, this is not working for me. That's why they don't bother voting. If it was working for them, they would bother. So in America, you have something like 150 million people who didn't bother voting, or weren't entitled to vote.
Having said that, the figure you mentioned, in fact, now create a tyrant, sort of a democratic tyranny.
It could do.
Trump controlled the Senate, right? The two houses, the High Court, and everything.
Yes.
So he is more or less demonstrate how politics can more or less point his finger to law and let law working as a slave to the benefit of himself, right?
In theory, yes. In practice, they should have separation of power.
Yes.
The judiciary is separate to the military, is separate to the government. And that should work in theory. And there's nothing wrong with a democratically elected president having control. I mean, the Supreme Court, these are not elected people. These are put there by the president. So the Senate, the Congress, the houses that they have, all are now Republican, as is the presidency and or will be the administration. So that's good because now maybe they can get things done. Because the system of democracy that they had, which is adversarial, means that if you have a Republican president and a Democratic Senate, the Senate are going to say no to everything. The president is going to say no to everything they do. And that's where China works so well, because everybody works for the same party. You do not have people, I mean, you have factions within the party. You have left and you have right. And you have pro and anti pretty much everything inside of Chinese politics. You have 8 political parties that are minor to the CPC. But they all swear allegiance to the people and the Constitution of China. So they're working for China and the betterment of China. And they all have 5-year elected terms. Now, what then happens is you have this thing which I prefer to call management. And that's the party. The party manages the government and it manages the country with the permission of the people. And if they wanted to change it, let's go back to 1949 and see what they did. Let's go back to 1911 and see what they did. When Chinese people want change comes, and that's probably the most important thing that most people forget. It is possible for China to change its government. All it needs to do is have another civil war. But they don't want that. Why would they change something that works so well? The Chinese government works very well.
Yes, that's the reason why we can see that the Western style of so-called democracy depends very much on the leadership of the person being elected. So now the American people, so to speak, even though not so many people vote, a person who's been prosecuted and a person who've been sort of involved in a civil litigation cases and so on, even before he would sort of declare or sort of taking his oath to become the 47th president of USA. The hearsay being telling us that all the record or the court litigate issues would be removed automatically.
I don't think he has the power to do that.
Not his power. The people saying that the prosecution side would withdraw that. If that happened, it would be very dangerous, right? So I'm just thinking we leave it at here and wait and see in the near future so that Jerry, you will have more time to watch and wait and see. On your side, telling your fans, and on my side, I'm telling my fans in my video, and we see what happened. And on the other hand, I think it is a great example to our Australian people and our Australian government. Watch, wait, and see how America would develop under the leadership of Trump. And we think about whether Australia should have our own independent diplomatic policy rather than listen to other countries, i.e. USA. So it is time for Australia to think about for the benefit of Australian people, not for the benefit of other countries. So that's my will. But I think a lot of our supporters would say, yes, we concurred. So that's the reason why I said a moment ago, let's leave all these questions to our supporters.
One thing that needs to be borne in mind is that Australian politicians don't have much choice. They are faced with a situation where logistically, financially, economically, militarily, agriculturally, and in terms of resources, the United States controls much of Australia's economy.
Yes.
And the people of Australia have no real idea of how deep this goes. There is a massive amount, I think something like in the top 20 companies in Australia, 16 of them are American controlled and 2 of them are heavily American invested and therefore influenced. So that accounts for 60% of the total revenue or income of Australia, or total GDP of Australia. Sorry, the total economy of Australia, 60% are in the top 20 companies, and they're nearly all American controlled. The other thing is that in terms of telecommunications, America controls that, because you did have the idea of putting Huawei in, and then America said, don't do it. So America is controlling communications, which is an area that they don't control financially. Militarily, America controls. The Prime Minister's office is getting its advice not from people in Australia, but from people in Washington. And they're telling him that China's a threat. It's not a threat. China's never been a threat to anyone militarily. China has not invaded anybody in its life, in its history. I mean, you can go back and say, oh, in 1976, they did this. Yeah, it was 3 weeks, but they didn't invade and occupy. They went in, did something that they said they were going to do, and came out. That's what they did. It was a neighborly dispute which ended up as a short war, and then they came out, and it's over now. Vietnam and China are good friends. Go back 1,000 years and China did invade Vietnam, but it's never gone off its shores. It's never invaded. Japan has invaded Australia. Japan are not your friends. America are not your friends. The biggest trading partner you have is your enemy? I don't believe that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I can't agree more. That's the reason why we have this conversation today. And I really hope that gradually people will understand back home in Australia. And they should understand the issue is not Chinese creating it. It's in fact other country, in other words, country other than China. And we hope that one day the bridge that we are building for China and Australia and the outside world will eventually can walk people across the bridge.
Let's hope so. Maybe we'll drive a train across it.
Yeah, anyway, thank you so much, Jerry.
Thank
you.
And
thanks for your time. Thank you so much. Bye.